from Texas A&M University, and I just finished completing my MBA degree from Rollins College here in Central Florida. With me, I have Michael Eagle, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Michael Eagle. Been with the firm for 3 years, and an engineering associate down in the Orlando, Florida office as well. As far as education goes, I got my bachelor's in civil engineering from Oregon Tech, and moved down here to Florida and been here ever since. Also with us is Jennifer Musselman. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, as Michael said, my name is Jennifer Musselman. I work for Kittleson in our Tampa office. I went to the University of Virginia where I got a degree in civil engineering and had the opportunity to intern with Kittleson in the Reston office. I then joined Kittleson full-time after graduating and started in the Orlando office and then moved to Tampa earlier this year. So I just want to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. After the presentation portion of the webinar, we'll take some time to answer any of the questions you may have. So feel free to enter questions into the chat box at any time during the presentation, and then we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. Throughout the presentation, we'll have a few poll questions. So I want to do a couple here just to get started and see who we have listening. So if you wouldn't mind letting us know what your grade level is in school. All right, thanks everyone. It looks like we have a lot of graduate students and a good mix of everyone. So then we'll do one more poll question to get an idea of what you all are studying. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of engineers listening today, but also a few planners. So I will now hand the presentation back to Carl to get us started.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jen. So we'll start with our overview. And today our objective is to give you information that will help you as you make your own career choices. So even if you're years from graduation, you're likely already thinking about what you want to do in the future, what kind of work you want to be doing, what kind of lifestyle you want, where you want to live. These are all important questions, and these are all choices that you'll be having to make. Even now, as you choose your electives or the topics that you may want to study further at school, you're beginning to set the path for your future. So regardless of where you are in your major or in your life, it's worthwhile to take some time, think about your choices, and reflect on what's important to you and your future. Regardless of what your specific career choice is, I think it's safe to say for every one of you that transportation will be a critical part of your life, your job, and your future. When you think about transportation as a whole, it's what gets us from point A to B, but it's also what connects us to all the goods and services we use and to all of our friends and family. Very simply, transportation is the thing that keeps us connected to our communities, to the people around us, and to the world as a whole. When you think about transportation connections, think about the wealth of things that encompasses. There's air transportation, water transportation, land transportation. Here in Florida, space transportation has come back in a big way. We also have different modes of travel: trains, buses, cars, planes, bikes, trucks, ships, even segways. There's a lot of different ways that people and goods move around. All of these are part of what defines transportation and our transportation system. So when we start looking at the challenges and opportunities, even though transportation is critical to our lives, there are several challenges and opportunities that we face, not just here in the United States, but globally. Everything from preserving and rebuilding our current infrastructure and system to freeing up our congested infrastructure in a way that maintains and enhances its safety, and provides an equitable and sustainable balance between our environment, our mobility, and our quality of life. Addressing these challenges will require our best minds and leaders. And that is why I really hope you look at these as not just challenges, but opportunities to make an impact and to make a difference on the communities and worlds around you. We'll now look at each challenge individually. A very real challenge is that much of our transportation system, such as the interstate system and many of our bridges and tunnels, are aging and are over 50 years old. Reconstruction and rehabilitation of our transportation system is a major challenge we face, particularly because much of it has to be done while keeping existing traffic moving. When you think about that major construction project, either on an arterial collector street or even on the interstate, yes, it would go tremendously faster if we could just shut the road down, but often that's not possible due to the impacts that it would have on other connections and facilities around the system. So we have to do the rehab and rehabilitation while the facilities are open for traffic. Years ago, the philosophy to maintenance could probably best be described as, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But today, transportation professionals are not waiting for it to break, but instead working well before that point to preserve the system. When you just think of the tremendous value of the 4 million miles of roads in this nation, it's easy to see how using a systematic approach to managing the transportation assets makes so much sense. Another challenge we face is safety. Each year, over 30,000 fatalities occur on our roads. On average, that's nearly 90 fatalities a day. We were able to reduce fatalities on our roads to the lowest level since 1949 recently, which is remarkable when you think that in the same time frame, traffic has increased 7-fold. So recently, while traffic's been increasing, the number of fatalities has decreased. So think about some of the things that have helped make that happen. Completion of the interstate system. The interstate system carries more traffic per mile than any road system in the United States, but it's also the safest part of our nation's 4 million lane miles of roads. The introductions of seat belts, airbags, crash protection, and improvements in vehicle construction and technology. And also stronger laws for drinking while driving or driving while distracted have all contributed to the reduction in fatalities. Roadway safety is getting more attention recently as cities across the country have begun adopting Vision Zero plans with the goal to eliminate all fatal and serious injury crashes on our roadways. There's still much work to be done as fatalities have crept up a little bit in 2015. It's also worth noting the potential for automated vehicles to positively impact safety is a major benefit that's been associated with AV technology. I'm sure that every one of you has experienced congestion, and if you are from an urban area, it may be something that you've lived with every day. Very simply, congestion occurs for two main reasons. One, when the demand exceeds the capacity of the intersection, and two, when something occurs that disrupts traffic and begins what we call a chain reaction, something like a car crash or a vehicle pulled over by police where everyone starts to back up behind it. It's also worth noting that congestion isn't limited to our highways. Air traffic has reached a point where there's a small buffer when weather or mechanical failures cause a breakdown in the system. We're also seeing congestions in some of our cities that have implemented a great bicycle and pedestrian network where the bike lanes are very congested with users. However, we are fortunate that in recent years a great deal has been done to improve the operation of our transportation systems. Examples include continuous monitoring of major highways and infrastructure to allow emergency vehicles to quickly respond to and clear accidents. Systems such as the Road Ranger system that we have on our interstates where if someone breaks down, there's someone there quickly to help them and clear the incident. HOV lanes and hot lanes have allowed us to improve throughput even when the system is stretched. And then in research that Kittleson has completed recently for the Federal Highway Administration, we are looking at systems and management techniques and tools to improve the travel time reliability of the transportation system. We're in the midst of significant changes. For example, vehicle technologies, automated braking, a lot of the things that we're seeing on some of the recent commercials where vehicles can sense when other cars or trucks are stopping and automatically adjust their speed to either stop or to better fit into the flow of the system. And then just the general availability of information on a real-time level to allow us to shift our travel patterns and understand where the congestion is and how to avoid it. I know every morning I ask Siri to give me the directions to work, and probably about 20% of the time I'm traveling on a different route than I typically would to save a few minutes of congestion. So no doubt that congestion is and will continue to be a major challenge, but it's also one of the areas where new technologies and practices are opening up great opportunities in the profession. Then in terms of equity, while we may not always think of it this way, transportation is really a balance between multiple social objectives. People need mobility to get to jobs and have access to goods and services. But for the same reason, transportation can be a powerful tool in opening job opportunities to communities and improving their access to other social benefits. Our challenges as transportation professionals is to look for ways and create alternatives that assure that we provide equitable treatment for all users and assure that in providing benefits to one group, we don't inadvertently harm another group. Another important consideration is the integration of transportation with the environment. What may look like the best engineering solution or the lowest cost solution for a transportation project may have severe environmental impacts that make it fatally flawed and something that can't be implemented. So looking into the future, we're already starting to see some of the exciting things growing on the horizon. Perhaps most exciting is the role that new technologies, mobile applications, nanotechnologies, new materials, advanced networking, autonomous vehicles will play in the transportation system. It's also very likely that we will see some new institutional mechanisms for financing travel. Through technology, toll facilities have become much more practical, eliminating the need for long lines at toll booths and the labor cost of toll collection. Smart passes are even being used now in a number of states to support hot lanes, where the charge for single occupant vehicles varies based on the time of day or the level of congestion on the other lanes. It is very much a pay-for-service concept that is now practical. It's something that we definitely see a lot of here in Florida. In Oregon, the state is going even further, experimenting with a mileage-based tax that is based on how far you drive, as opposed to the gas tax, which is based on how much gas you consume. The future of these opportunities is in front of us every day, and it's a very exciting time to be a part of the transportation community.
All right, so now we're going to take a quick break to ask another poll question. So what do you all find most exciting about the field of transportation? And while you all answer, I'll ask Michael to share some of his thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Kind of segueing off of what Carl just explained there in the last slide, I think that to me is probably the most exciting part about transportation for me, just really how transportation will probably change over the course of my career. Being relatively new to the industry, I think the roles of autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, those sorts of things will have a very large impact on changes to standard practices and methodologies like the Highway Capacity Manual, things like that. And I think that there's some really cool opportunities to improve operational efficiency as well as really the safety side. Carl had touched on that 30,000 fatalities happen a year and kind of the vision zero that many states have set a goal towards. I think connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, those sorts of things will definitely play a large role in really hopefully achieving that goal.
Thanks, Michael. So it looks like a lot of you are most excited for the role that transportation has in shaping our community. So thanks for answering, and we will let Carl wrap up this section of the presentation.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about different career opportunities in transportation. And in starting that, I'd like you to think about, where do you see yourself in all of this, and what kind of career opportunities can you expect to find in transportation? So I'll start by describing a few things about the job market in transportation and what you may want to explore further. When we talk about transportation, many people often just think about engineers. There are many important things that engineers can bring to the design and construction of projects, but the transportation workforce is much broader than just engineers. For example, just within Kittleson and Associates, our staff includes people with backgrounds in urban planning, environmental studies, public policy, structural design, IT systems and design, finance and business, landscape architecture, marketing and communications. So basically, as you can see, people in nearly every field are likely to find opportunities in the transportation community. A couple of other examples: Caltrans has its own team of archaeologists. FHWA has its own historian. When you think about safety organizations that are associated with transportation, they often include doctors and public health professionals. And nearly all of us have hired biologists and worked with environmentalists at some point in time to help with our environmental assessment studies. So in looking at the public sector, transportation has long been considered part of the public works arena that are supported by government agencies, and this is particularly in the case of roads and bridges. In most cases, states, counties, and cities own and operate the roadway network and are responsible for planning for the streets and highways that serve their communities, programming funding to carry out that plan, then assuring that the projects are designed, built, and maintained according to accepted standards. In some agencies on the public side, this work's done in-house by their own staff, but more and more agencies are now using consultants and contractors to do the design and construction, and in some cases, even the maintenance and operations of their projects. They still provide oversight of the projects and overall project management, but the hands-on work is being done more and more in the private sector. Another function that transportation professionals in government perform is assuring that the laws and policies passed by their legislatures, councils, and boards are implemented. In some cases, these may be engineering or safety standards, but they also include literally hundreds of laws directed at protecting the environment, occupational safety, social justice, labor standards, and a whole host of other areas. One of the reasons that it is so important to transportation is that most transportation improvements use public funds, and as a result are subject to all of the laws and rules that come with using those funds. In the private sector, the work tends to be more dynamic because consultants work on many transportation issues and problems, including the latest research being done through the Transportation Research Board and FHWA's Turner Fairbank Research Center. So working on items from research all the way through to major interstate traffic studies and designs. It's a very wide field. Consultants also help state and local governments develop the plans they need to improve mobility, safety, transit, and pedestrian access, and then help them develop the projects to carry out those plans. Consultants also help do work that is used to develop national transportation policies or implement new laws and rules. The private sector also provides a lot of training to the transportation community through universities and other outlets. And finally, consultants do a lot of work for other private sector clients, helping develop new commercial and manufacturing centers and fostering economic growth. So where does KAI fit into this spectrum? So this last series of slides that I'll talk about, while they're about KAI, are really meant to get you thinking about important but often overlooked aspects of your career search. Often people quickly dive into the specifics of the particular job they're applying for and screen job opportunities based on factors such as location and compensation. We'd like to encourage you to think more deeply and consider factors such as the organization's purpose, their values, and how they impact their purpose and implement their values through their operating philosophy. While compensation and location are obviously very important, we also believe that these other elements are very important aspects of your career search because they'll play a large part in how passionate and committed you are to the work you do and how much fulfillment you receive in return for doing that work. It's important to understand that careers are not simply jobs, they're vocations. Organizations are not just employers that are working towards a defined mission. Organizations have a purpose, and just like individuals, organizations have values. An organization's purpose and values often tell a story about why the organization came to be. As such, you will find that the values across multiple organizations are not all the same. But that doesn't mean that one is right and another is wrong. It simply reflects that each organization is different. So one of your objectives in job search process should be to identify the values of the organization and assess how well they fit with your individual beliefs and philosophies. The firm purpose for Kittleson that we have shown on the slide are to create and sustain a lifelong environment for all of our staff, to increase the value and contributions of our profession, and to provide the opportunity for the independent success of every employee. Now moving on to our core values. At Kittleson, our core values are summed up in two ways. Our outward focus, and that focus is applied towards our clients, towards each other, towards the profession, and towards our families. And that means thinking about others before we just think of ourselves. And then operating in a trust-based environment. And that trust-based environment is the trust from the staff to the firm and the trust from the firm to the staff. And with these values, we see that they're meaningful beliefs and that values are meaningful beliefs and philosophies of an organization. Every organization has them, whether they are consciously aware of them or not. So while generally broad and encompassing, values get implemented in the smallest details of people's lives. These values guide our thinking, they guide the thinking of our staff, and they guide the thinking of individuals. And it's far better to assess the values of an individual and an organization based on their actions, not just the words they say or the statements they put on the wall. So switching to operating philosophies. Operating philosophies are mechanisms in which organizations practice their values and implement their purpose, goals, and objectives. For Kittleson, we have what we refer to as our one firm operating philosophy. We're a flat organizational structure that puts a lot of trust in its employees. That goes back to our core values of a trust-based environment and outward focus. We believe in exchanges with our staff for completing projects and spending time in different locations. And we also place a high premium on communication, establishing connections with one another, making the firm's resources available, and sharing resources with everyone. So now that we've covered our purpose, values, and operating philosophy, let me give you some examples of questions you might pose to potential employers to help you better understand these characteristics that you're looking for. So one potential question is why was the company, organization, or department established? Another question, describe the organization's core values and how they are used in practice. Another question, give an example of an important and difficult decision your organization recently made. What were the trade-offs involved, and what led you to the decision you made? For what purpose does your organization choose to add staff, reduce staff, increase the breadth or depth of a service area? And then finally, a good question is always, who will I have as a mentor to help guide me early in my career? These are the types of questions that you have to listen carefully for the answers, and oftentimes you have to ask it of multiple people to make sure that the message is consistent throughout the organization. A look at our office locations. Kittleson itself, we're not a large company. We have about 200 employees, but we do have a presence in 11 states across the country. And we believe in having offices around the country because it gives our employees a chance to learn about different organizations and how different governments operate.
All right, thanks, Carl. So we'll do another poll question now to see what you find most intriguing about KAI's purpose and values, and I'll let Carl share his response while you all are answering.
Okay, thanks, Jen. What I find most intriguing about KAI's purpose and values is how it really permeates throughout the organization. You take the organizational structure, which is really focused on the project level and how to best staff and serve our clients and complete our projects, and you make that at a flat structure where there's not a lot of hierarchy and there aren't specific managers that are in charge of specific departments where everyone is sharing, and you mix that with your core values of a trust-based environment and an outward focus, and you can see how it all starts to come together. Our purpose and values of helping the profession and helping ourselves and our families and our communities, it requires a lot of trust, it requires a lot of communication, and it requires a lot of dedication and decision-making at all levels of the organization. And when you put all that together, it starts to give a pretty good indication of a lot of the characteristics that we look for in potential employees.
Great, thanks, Carl. And to share the responses from the audience, it looks like most of you are looking forward to lifelong learning. So with that, we'll go to Michael to continue the presentation.
Great, thanks, Jen. So the next few slides I'll go over will be kind of targeted on some of the specific types of projects Kittleson is involved in. And as you'll see, there's a pretty good variety. But yeah, so we'll start with, first off, transportation planning. So transportation can significantly impact the livability of a place. Planning projects allow us to ensure that transportation infrastructure is deliberately planned. Most communities, whether they be cities, counties, states, or even universities, have some sort of planning process where community needs are identified and aligned with transportation projects. Some of these plans may be long range, prioritizing transportation projects and funding 30 years into the future. Other projects may be shorter term and focus on a specific roadway or corridor that a community has already identified as a priority. Because the community's needs are so central to transportation planning, all of our planning projects involve some level of community outreach, whether that be to a stakeholder group or to the general public. As you can see on the slide, there's a handful of kind of examples of planning projects, long-range plans, neighborhood traffic management, planning policy, different parking studies, multimodal performance, corridor planning, travel demand modeling, master plans and sub-area studies, and livable transportation plans. So I'll go through a handful of specific transportation planning projects that KAI has been involved with in the past. This project, the Livable Claiborne Communities Planning Study, was involved along Interstate 10 in New Orleans. This, as you can see in the slide, the highlighted red interstate is going into downtown New Orleans. This is kind of a schematic of the existing interstate system. Really, the premise of this whole project is that this interchange, the community felt like it was dividing kind of the community up, as well as really taking away some of the usable space underneath the ramps. As you can see, there's quite a few ramps, and it takes up a pretty large footprint. So our job was to come in and kind of evaluate potential configurations to minimize the footprint of this interchange and hopefully give back some usable land for the community, but then also evaluate the potential operational repercussions of changing these configurations. And so in this example, we had suggested to remove the sections in red, and there were some new ramp configurations proposed that were in a lot smaller of a footprint. And as you can see here, you can, I guess, kind of see the larger ramps were removed, kind of faded in red there, and the footprint shrunk significantly. The community had kind of feared that with these, reducing the number of lanes and changing these configurations as drastically as we had proposed, there was kind of some concerns from the community as well as the DOT of, how would this impact traffic? Is this going to make, this even more congested? Kind of what are, some of the implications of this configuration? And really what we found was that the impacts from this reconfiguration weren't actually going to be as severe as the community and the DOT had first feared. And really, this kind of gave a pretty big opportunity to give the community some land back, for some open spaces, parks, things like that. Another example of a planning project is this Complete Streets project that we have done for the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization down here in Florida, in Brevard County, along the Space Coast, obviously, near where they fire off all the shuttles. Complete Streets are planned, designed, and operated so that all users can travel comfortably and safely along and across them, regardless of the user's age, abilities, or travel mode. This slide shows an example of the existing conditions on this corridor. As you can see, there's a lot of open pavement space, really kind of undefined areas, some gaps and some sidewalks, no marked bike lanes, things like that. And so as part of what we evaluated for a Complete Streets study, we came up with this concept, and really this kind of encompassed the community's vision for this corridor. You can see there's marked bicycle lanes, continuous sidewalks. We really provided some bulb outs at the intersection corners to reduce crossing distances for pedestrians. Really just kind of enhance the multimodal characteristics of this corridor. And yeah, again, as I mentioned previously, the community and the public are really involved in these projects, and they have a very large say in what goes into these, which is kind of cool because it ultimately affects them, the community, and their families. And as a kind of a side note, here in Florida, Kittleson as a firm has actually gotten the opportunity to work with the Florida Department of Transportation to advance a statewide Complete Streets initiative in developing a Complete Streets handbook. And this ultimately will lead to roadway design criteria that are based on land use context, as opposed to some of the just very defined kind of design criteria that the DOT uses now. So it's kind of a cool opportunity that we have down here to kind of work at the statewide level to get this handbook completed. So another type of project we deal a good amount with is transit planning, whether it be bus rapid transit, transit signal priority, or TSP, transit development planning, performance or concurrency measurement, or transit-oriented development. And transit planning is a specific type of planning project, obviously, and encompasses a variety of transportation modes, including buses, streetcars, light rail, and heavy rail. These types of projects can be long-range, evaluating bus routes and frequency for an entire system, or the on-the-ground implementation, for example, transit signal priority, where a streetcar or bus is given the priority at a signalized intersection. And kind of branching off of that transit planning, though these aren't specific types of projects, the use of Bluetooth technology and microscopic simulation can greatly aid in the planning process. And this is an example of Bluetooth or BlueMac reader technology that we used for a study in Washington, D.C. The Bluetooth technology can help us provide point-to-point travel times. They can be used for before and after studies or origin-destination studies. The microscopic simulation and animation is crucial for both the operations of kind of some non-conventional networks or transit. So we are able to code and evaluate buses, rail, and vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists. I mean, these can be very, very handy and provide a lot of value for public meetings. We use a lot down here in Florida a software called vSim, a microsimulation software to, again, do operations as well as public meetings for like roundabouts, for example, or kind of some unique intersection or interchange configurations that the public may not fully understand how they'll work in the future. So that's kind of another value that the simulation provides. So moving on into public works. So when a community is ready to design and construct a transportation project that was identified in the planning stages, we enter the realm of public works. These types of projects include the design and operation of transportation systems and are often projects being constructed or implemented in the near term. There's really a lot more public works projects that we do, but some of the examples we've got listed here are operational and safety studies, railroad at-grade crossings, ITS signal system evaluations, flexible services, preliminary, and final design. So one project that's in Carl and my backyard down here in Orlando is a larger scale public works project that KAI has been involved in, called the Interstate 4 Beyond the Ultimate project. You can see here this is a configuration or a concept of a future diverging diamond configuration along a stretch of Interstate 4 here, that really this project will be evaluating tolled express lanes and new interchange configurations for over 25 interchanges along approximately 40 miles of interstate through Central Florida. This project will be completed as two separate north and south sections, and KAI is currently evaluating the south section, which, if any of you have visited Orlando, is near all the attractions such as Walt Disney World, Universal, Legoland, etc. KAI's role in this project is to forecast future traffic volumes and evaluate the operations of the freeway mainline lanes, the ramps, and the interchange, the ramp terminal intersections at the interchanges, really to identify the appropriate number of lanes that will be needed to accommodate future traffic. We'll be evaluating these facilities and intersections using the Highway Capacity Manual freeway facilities methodologies and microsimulation software called VSIM, as I previously mentioned in the last slide. And really, once we're completed with this study, these configurations will be carried forward into the design phase and ultimately constructed. So another example of a public works project that we do, probably a lot more common, is really at the intersection level, whether it be the design of a new signal, or in this case, as shown here, an example of a roundabout. Our part of the project may include the initial concept sketch, really how the intersection will be aligned, number of lanes, those sorts of things, or it could include the final design, which would include details such as siding, striping, drainage, and lighting. And kind of narrowing the microscope even further, we are also involved in some design, which could include the implementation of a livable community plan. In this case, the community wanted to adjust the lighting and landscape along the roadway. For this type of project, we compile design plans, for example, the sheet in the bottom left corner, which includes detailed information such as wiring for the lighting, location of the conduits, number of trees, those sorts of things. So really getting into really the nitty-gritty details down at the, at a very minute scale. So I don't know, I think it's kind of cool that the variety of kind of public scale projects that we have the opportunity to work on. Again, really from the interstate, a very large interstate system, down to affecting a community or roadways, lighting or landscape, those sorts of things. Another big component that we touched on earlier, transportation safety. Kittleson is involved in a lot of research. They're implementing, we're writing the second edition of the Highway Safety Manual right now. We did write the first edition as well. Other types of safety studies include corridor and intersection safety analysis, bike ped safety audits, crash history analytics, and ADA compliance studies. And really, safety is a consideration in every project, but there are some projects where safety is really at the forefront. We've kind of had the opportunity down here where there have been some fatalities that have really spurred evaluations of particular intersections or roadway corridors. And these types of projects include everything from the on-the-ground safety assessments to evaluation of the historical crash trends, all the way using safety research in future crash prediction models that can be found in the Highway Safety Manual. Another aspect that we're involved in is development services. These include TIAs, or transportation impact analyses, can include some functional design, traffic design, some kind of special case studies, some site analysis, evaluating parking lots and proper access in and out. And then we also are involved in helping developers get through the approval process within the city or county or state's jurisdiction. So yeah, while many of our projects are for public agencies, we do serve private clients. These often include developers who want to construct new housing or maybe commercial space. In order to develop their property, public agencies often require that development show the impact that new development will have on the nearby transportation facilities. And really, as part of these projects, we help developers determine their level of impact and any improvements that they may be necessary to accommodate the additional traffic or changes in new traffic patterns. And finally, as I mentioned previously, with the Highway Safety Manual update, Kittleson is involved in a lot of transportation research. from manuals to actual short courses to webinars to DOTs or to other consultants. We're heavily involved in research projects with TRB, Transportation Research Board, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, Federal Highway Administration, the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, Strategic Highway Safety Program, state DOTs, and the Transit Cooperative Highway Research Program. As mentioned before, in addition to actually conducting the research itself, KI also facilitates and conducts a variety of courses related to transportation engineering and planning. The slide we're showing here in the background, the gentleman that's presenting was one of the principal authors on the Roundabout Guide, the most recent edition, and he does really some courses across the country as well as the state, and a lot of the state DOTs and cities and counties rely heavily on his expertise when looking at roundabouts and design and construction staging and those sorts of things. So with that, I will pass it back to Jennifer.
Thanks, Michael. And we'll actually pause for a poll question here. Now that Michael shared a lot of different project examples with you, we want to know what area of transportation most interests you, and we'll hear from Michael as well.
Yeah, so the most intriguing part of transportation for me, I guess kind of my two passions that I've kind of developed in my short time here at Kittleson have been interstate or freeway operations, as well as roundabouts. So I've had some pretty cool opportunities to work with operational software to evaluate roundabouts, signals, interchanges. But then I've also had some pretty cool chances to actually design or develop some conceptual designs for some roundabouts and different intersection configurations, and then really have been able to take it even one step further in the kind of in the process and go through the VSIM microsimulation piece to really kind of bring it home for the public. I don't know, those are really the reasons I got really into transportation, and I think the experiences I've gotten here have further solidified those interests and passions. So.
Thanks, Michael. And looking at the poll results, it sounds like a lot of you are interested in the development services work and transportation planning. All right, so now I'm going to share a few tips for those of you that are currently looking for a job or internship, and then go into more of the details of the internship program we have here at Kittleson. So earlier in the presentation, Carl explained all of the potential career paths within the transportation industry, and you have a lot of choices and opportunities ahead of you. So whether you end up in the public sector or the private sector, or maybe in academic research, it's important to think about your work as more than just a job, because it will have great implications on your life as well. So these are just a few of the questions you should be asking yourself early on in your job or internship search. Where do you want your career to lead you? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 20 years even? Is this office and work environment one where you see yourself growing, not just professionally, but personally as well? One thing we would really encourage you to start thinking about now, again, is the values in the organization. And this can sometimes be difficult to get out of just a single interview or a phone call. So make sure you do ask those tough questions, and don't be afraid to ask for specific examples of how a firm's values play out in everyday life. I'll touch on benefits and compensation more in a minute. But first I want to share some of the key characteristics to be looking for in a potential employer. One is an employer that takes an interest in your growth and development. Ask about the training programs, how involved they are in professional organizations, and what resources are available to help employees learn and grow. Another characteristic to look out for is an open environment where you feel comfortable sharing your thoughts and opinions. Look for an environment that makes you feel like you're really part of the team and that your voice and opinion matters. Ask yourself, is this a place where you would feel comfortable speaking up in a meeting, or even just jumping into a casual lunch conversation? The next one is mentorship. And mentorship can really make or break an experience, especially early on in your career. So make sure to look for mid and senior level staff that you would feel comfortable going to for questions and guidance. I'll go into more detail about our mentorship program here at Kittleson in a few minutes. And lastly here, something that was really important to me in my job search is a place that's going to challenge you, in a company where you're exposed to a variety of work and experiences. Having a wide variety of experience is a great way to accelerate your professional development. It makes work more exciting just because every day is a little bit different. And most importantly, the more you're exposed to early on in your career, the more likely you are to ultimately find what you're most passionate about, and sooner rather than later. So compensation is, of course, an important consideration when you're looking for a job. But what we want to show here in this graph is that there's really a small difference in starting salaries at the entry level. But as your years of experience increase, there's a much bigger difference in the minimum and maximum salaries we see in the field. And it's really those opportunities and experiences that you have early on in your career that help dictate which of these trajectories you stay on. So again, make sure you are seeking those opportunities for growth early on, because it can make a big difference later on in your career. And then this slide is just simply a reminder that your total compensation package is more than just your base salary. So when you're evaluating a potential offer, it's important to look at things like healthcare, contributions to a retirement fund, and how the company approaches profit distribution or end-of-the-year bonuses. So now we'll go to another poll question. And this time, we want to know what you think is most valuable from an internship or full-time position. And we'll have Carl share his thoughts on this while you all are answering.
So the most valuable takeaway from an internship full-time position, I think for me, it's a combination of obviously the technical knowledge and being able to learn is always important, but also just the relationships that you make along the way. The transportation community especially is a very small world. The folks that you study with now as an undergrad or as a master's student, those are the peer group and the support that you'll have throughout your career. A small example for me is my instructor at Penn State is now a part-time employee of Kittleson, and a couple of the folks that I went to graduate school with, I'm now working on projects. They're with different organizations, and we still keep in touch, and we're working on a potential automated vehicle, connected vehicle project through connections that I had in grad school. So I think that combination of technical knowledge, but even more importantly, the relationships that you make along the way are the values that I take away.
Thanks, Carl. And it looks like a lot of you share the same sentiments and are looking forward to those relationships both with your peers and with other professionals in the field. So now we'll move on to more information about our internship program, because it's really one of the best ways to learn about Kittleson. I mentioned in the introductions that I had the opportunity to be a Kittleson intern while I was a student, and it was one of the best experiences of my undergraduate career. I think it's safe to say that I learned more in that one summer than I did in any of my transportation classes at school. Each year we hire anywhere from 6 to 12 students from universities around the country to be a part of the internship program. And we hire both undergraduate and graduate students and look for students from a variety of majors, including, of course, engineering and planning, but we've also had interns with backgrounds in architecture, business, policy, geography. The list goes on from there. The most important thing is that you really just have that passion for transportation and the willingness to learn. We like to think of our interns as a class. There's usually only one intern in an office, sometimes two in our larger offices, but we provide weekly opportunities for them to check in with each other and discuss their project work, compare experiences, and just relate to how things are going. We also have weekly tech sessions where the interns can learn about topics such as Consulting 101, the latest and greatest safety analysis practices, and one of my personal favorites, the history of roundabouts. And so we try to give our interns a variety of project work. If you're an engineering student, we'll try to get you involved in a planning project. And if you're a planning project, don't be surprised if we have you doing some traffic operations. All of our interns will also have multiple check-ins with our CEO throughout the summer. And they meet usually as a group with our CFO to learn more about accounting and the firm's financials. Our goal is really for you to come away with a good understanding of what it means to be a transportation consultant. One thing that stood out to me about Kittleson was the mentorship program. Every intern is given a mentor who will help them not just find housing and get settled in maybe a new city, but will help them throughout the summer to find project work and really be that go-to person to answer all their questions. As a full-time employee now, I continue to reach out to the mentor I had as an intern to help me with my professional development. And I also want to mention that mentorship is not something that's unique to our internship program. All full-time staff are also given a mentor that initially serves a very similar role as the intern mentor. So they'll help you get settled, make sure you are getting a variety of project work, and make sure that you have the tools you need to learn. And then after 6 months or maybe a year, you're encouraged to pick your own coach. So that can be anyone in the firm who you've developed a good relationship with and trust to guide you as you continue to grow in your career. But arguably the best part of our internship program is what we call the intern jamboree. So I mentioned that we usually will only have one intern in each office, but for 1 week in the summer, we fly all of the interns to the same office. And you get to spend the week getting to know each other, getting to know the staff in that office, and exploring the city. So it's a great way to expand your professional network, and it's just a lot of fun. So as we wrap up this presentation, I wanted to share some of the qualities we look for in both interns and full-time candidates. I mentioned the most important thing is that passion for transportation. It's always helpful if you come in with transportation experience through your coursework, prior internships, or maybe some research opportunities. But what we are really looking for is candidates that have the qualities to thrive in consulting and candidates that share our core values. So that wraps up the presentation portion of the webinar. When I sent you all the link to today's webinar, I also included my contact information and Michael's contact information. So if you have any questions after today, feel free to reach out to us. And then if you are interested in expressing interest in either a full-time position or an internship, we would encourage you to do so by going to the career section of our website. So with that, now we'll take some time to answer the questions that you all have. And I see that some of you have already put in some questions. Please continue to do so, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So Carl, I'll send this first one your way. The first question, what are your views on the way current autonomous and connected vehicle technologies will improve the current transportation system?
So the way that the connected vehicles will improve the transportation system, I think there's a lot of different ways to approach that question. I'll start at a broad-based level with if you believe that we'll get to full automation and the options that provides are pretty amazing, where folks don't have to own a car and there's this constant fleet of automated vehicles that are on demand, and the need for parking garages and parking lots significantly diminishes, and the provision of transportation is much more equitable. The implications for pricing, the implications for insurance, just the whole change in the model is pretty amazing to think about. And I think at a profession level, it starts to introduce a whole different range of needed skill sets, because the data that will come from automated vehicles will be tremendous, and the issues regarding the data analysis, storage, and how all that begins to fit together are things that folks are working on now, but there's no easy answers.
Thanks, Carl. So I'll take this next question. Do you ever help transit agencies plan spatially for the right-of-way of a new line? I would say yes, and also that it's not specific to transit agencies. So whenever we're looking at a project for a new roadway or a roadway widening or a new transit line, right-of-way is always a question that comes up, and it's our job as consultants to those public agencies to guide them through that decision-making process. So we will outline the benefits of the proposed improvements and the costs associated with them. In some cases, those costs do include buying new land and taking right-of-way, and just provide them with all the information they need to make that decision. So Michael, I'll send you this next question. How would you describe the working environment in your offices? What is the layout like, and what is the workplace culture?
Sure. So the layout, we've done some recent renovations within the last year or so that really blends a mix of some open space with some enclosed offices. We've got really two large open areas. I would not describe them as a cube farm. You won't find a cube really anywhere in any of the firm's offices throughout the country, but rather we have stand-up desks, really a good amount of kind of your own space to operate, and really I guess with any open space, I guess the only downside is if your neighbor is on the phone all the time. But we do have some quiet rooms, some telephone conference rooms for people to use. But really that open space kind of leads into really some kind of cool and unique collaboration. We've got a mix of kind of some senior staff as well as some junior staff in these spaces. So you're able to very quickly communicate, whether it be simple kind of everyday questions or very project-specific project-specific problems. You're able to kind of collaborate in some of that open area, which I really enjoy. But you do also have the ability to kind of be independent and grind out a report or whatever you need to get done. So I don't know, I really enjoy kind of having that flexibility and variety. So.
And we've gotten a couple of questions on whether or not we accept international students for full-time employment and internships, and the answer is yes, we do, and we do help with the visa process if necessary. So Carl, the next question for you: does a graduate degree have a significant impact on your ability to get a job with Kittleson?
We evaluate undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, PhDs. We have a variety of folks that apply for positions, and we have a variety of different degrees within the firm. It's helpful, but it's not required. I think the elements that you went over in terms of the characteristics that we look for: humble, willful, inquisitive, outward focused. Those are the basic characteristics that we're looking for in everyone. But we don't have a specific number that says we want to hire X amount of undergrad degrees, X amount of master's students, or X amount of PhDs. We have like I said, we have a variety within the firm, and we recognize some of the differences that come with advanced degrees, and we just really are looking for the fundamental characteristics and the skill sets, and we have a pretty fundamental assumption that each person, no matter what level of education they have, is going to spend quite a bit of time learning about consulting and learning about the type of work we do. So again, we evaluate everyone on their individual merits.
So Michael, this next one was for you. In regards to KA as one firm concept, as an employee in Orlando, what has your experience been like working on projects around the state or around the country?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, as we kind of described earlier on in the presentation, we do encourage staff exchanges, cross-office collaboration. We understand that at times, for me to go out to Oregon to work on a project with some people out there may not be the most efficient, or it's going to impact the bottom line, but that's not necessarily what drives our firm. We really just value the relationships, and again, with those office exchanges, we kind of hope most of the time that those can be centered around a project, so that project can help fund some of the logistical costs, such as housing or a flight. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't have a project lined up, that you can't go do a week or two exchange. In some cases, we've had some folks here in Florida go and do a 6 to 9 month kind of exchange in a different office. They wanted to expand really upon their career and grow professionally, in getting some opportunities to work with some different agencies, different clients. So that's kind of a unique thing that we do, and it's certainly a possibility, and in some cases, for the shorter term, exchanges is certainly encouraged.
Thanks, Michael. And then the next question, someone asked, when I was an intern, what about KAI and their values convinced me to come back for full-time employment? And it was a couple of things. I really enjoyed the project work that I was doing and the work that Kittleson does, but it was really seeing the investment that Kittleson makes in its interns that convinced me to come back full-time. As an intern, I didn't quite know what to expect, but really you have the full attention of the entire company, and you can call anyone and ask them a question, and they'll be more than happy to give you 5 minutes, 30 minutes of their time to help you out. So just to see that level of investment in a little old intern, I knew it would only go up from there as a full-time staff person, and I have not been disappointed. So Carl and Michael, I'll send this question your way and see if you have any thoughts. Someone asked a question related to safety, in that we're seeing a higher percentage of accidents take place in rural areas, even though the volumes in those areas might not be as high. Do you have any proposed solutions for roadway design that might improve safety in these rural areas? And is there any work Killeson's doing in that area?
Yeah, rural areas. I spent a bit of my grad school work collecting data on rural 2-lane highways. Oftentimes, the severity of crashes in the rural environments are higher. The level of design of facilities isn't as high. You have trees or obstructions closer to the road. You have more curves, just as opposed to more urban or arterial-based, where the design standards may be higher. In the rural environment, you also have some intersections where driver expectations may not be met, that when there are crashes, there may not be many, but they are pretty severe. So some of the treatments that we've been looking at, roundabouts at intersections and putting in appropriate speed control measures on the approaches, improved signage with the retroreflectivity, looking at the roadside environment are also very important elements. And then just in general with safety, here in Central Florida, in Orlando, we often have the dubious distinction of being the #1 area for pedestrian and bicycle fatalities in the country. A lot of different reasons for that. So safety is a big issue. The Florida DOT has really put a lot of focus on getting rid of free flow right turn lanes, setting the new standards of 7-foot buffered bike lanes, and really trying to place a focus on pedestrian and bicycle movement. So just in general, safety is it's a field that continues to grow, and it's a field that still needs a lot of research and understanding, because as you can imagine, crash data is pretty oftentimes random events, and it's hard to really pinpoint the effects of specific accidents and crashes. But there are a lot of new tools that are available over the past 5 or so years that are moving the profession forward.
So the next question, any thoughts on private transit services such as Uber's carpooling, the Google Bus, and private van services? And I can start with this question, and Carl and Michael, you can feel free to add. But yeah, it's certainly exciting to see all of these private companies come on with on-demand transit services that give people more options. And it'll be interesting to see how their relationships grow with public transit agencies. Some public transit agencies have welcomed them with open arms and have started partnering with them, and some see them as competition. So that will definitely be interesting to see how that plays out. Here in Florida, we are seeing both the Florida Department of Transportation and local transit agencies start to explore some of these partnerships. Here in Tampa and in the neighboring St. Petersburg, they have contracts with private transit services to serve those lower density areas where it doesn't make sense to put a fixed route, a local bus, and so sending an Uber out costs the transit agency much less than providing a fixed route service, and also is a better service for the person as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating a topic. The policy discussions are very interesting. We do have some examples, as Jennifer mentioned, even here in Central Florida, where cities are using Uber service for their last mile type of trip where there isn't a high percentage, but the cities are actually subsidizing the trip, which introduces the policy question of why does Uber get that versus the taxi service versus Lyft versus Zipcar and all kinds of things. So yeah, it's definitely a newer tool in the toolbox, and often that one's not so much revolving around an engineering or planning concept, but also the policy implications and the acceptance and business implications that it may have in an area.
Thanks, and we'll take one more question, and this is a question that I think each of us can answer. What is a project you've worked on that you believe has the greatest impact on a community? And for Michael and I, that might be the greatest potential for impact on the community, as I personally haven't seen any of my projects built just yet. But I'll start out there. I'm working on one project, actually right in front of the Orlando office. It's a corridor planning study through downtown Orlando and looking at a possible lane elimination to go from a 4-lane undivided roadway to a 2 or 3 lane facility with a center left turn lane in order to accommodate more bicycle and pedestrian uses. It's right in downtown, and Robinson Street is pretty notorious for being difficult to cross, but yet you still have people run across it every day. Carl, Michael, and I are all guilty of it as we run across to grab lunch on a Friday. So that's one that I'm excited to see wrap up and hopefully get built, because I think it'll be a great addition to the city of Orlando.
For mine, though it might not be, I guess, for a community or a city, for example, really the interstate project that I had described here in Central Florida, I think that's something that, some of the ADTs along the interstate there have been recorded at over 200,000 vehicles a day. And again, though it might not have the pedestrian and bicyclist kind of feel to it, those are, impacting people getting to and from work that use the interstate as well as the tourism, the very large tourism aspect that really funds a lot of what we do here in Central Florida and in Florida in general. So to really work on something that's going to impact hundreds of thousands of people a day, to me that's pretty exciting, and that's something that I'm really interested in and passionate about.
Okay. Well, I think to play on terms a little bit, impact can mean a lot of different things, and I've had a chance to work on some city community type projects many years ago when traffic calming was first becoming popular. Working at the actual neighborhood level, you hear the impact of the decisions you make because the public lets you know, and sometimes that's very good, and sometimes that can be challenging when you're asked how much the value of a child is in your decision-making process on whether or not to implement a particular solution or not. It can rattle you a little bit. So, to those people on that street where you were either going to or not going to implement a particular project, it has a big impact on them. One smaller project, which is kind of related to traffic calming, we were working on a project that had a connection to the hospital, and the ambulances did not want vertical traffic calming, so they didn't want traffic humps, and we were asked to design some different types of treatments for that facility. And I worked with someone here in our office that was very good with roundabouts, and we used some of those principles of horizontal deflection and really created these types of treatments that we really hadn't seen implemented before. But we worked all the way through the preliminary design and the designs, and that street has had those treatments on it for at least 15 years, and it's always very rewarding when you see something that you've done on the ground and people are generally happy with. And then kind of going to the total opposite end of the spectrum, Michael mentioned the I-4 project that we're working on, and that has just a huge project here in the region. The overall construction value will probably be over $2 billion. And to have the chance to work on an infrastructure project of that magnitude, even though what we do is a very small piece, but to be able to see the different decisions that are made along the way and the issues and pieces that have to be resolved has just been very eye-opening, very fascinating. And it's one of those things where you're talking to your friends or your family and they don't really know what the heck you're talking about, but when you say you're doing something out by Disney, everyone kind of nods their head and goes, oh yeah, I remember that road. So that one's been pretty cool, and I'll hopefully see it constructed here in the next 5 or so years.
All right, thanks everyone. So we'll go ahead and stop there. If we weren't able to get to your question or you have additional questions after today, feel free to email either Michael or myself. And there will be a brief survey after the webinar, so we'd appreciate any feedback. And thank you all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.